Hey everybody, let's start talking about the ecology of teaching. So this chapter should be a little bit more interesting maybe than some of the other ones because it talks more in depth about your role as a teacher and how you specifically socialize and how you create a classroom environment that affects the way students are able to learn. So they bulleted a couple points here. Teaching students to deal with authority, cooperation, cope with problems, achieve competence. Sometimes I want to be independent because you have so many helicopter parents that the classroom is the first place that the student is able to really learn to be independent and use more critical thinking. So that's sort of an interesting side note. I love this because you have to really choose what kind of classroom you're going to run. And if you're going to run a very authoritarian classroom, it's going to work well with some students, but you're going to have trouble with other types of students, and it's very black and white. I know a lot of teachers that teach in a very authoritarian style, and they're comfortable with it, and it seems to work. I don't know. You have to pick which one works for you. Democratic is more collaborative. That was a classroom that I felt more comfortable in teaching. Obviously, I run my classroom that way, probably even a little laissez-faire, which I'd rather actually not be. So anyway, you need to spend some time thinking about those definitions and thinking about which kind of a classroom you're going to run. ZPD is a common term, and it's important to understand it. And it means that you've got a learner who's got a specific set of skills, but when you put them with a certain group, they're able to learn so much more than what they would learn listening to you talk or working by themselves. You can't use a zone of proximal development if you don't know the zone your student is in. So the basis of this whole idea is that you know your students well enough to know their strengths and weaknesses, and you've done enough assessment to have a strong idea about that. Then you have to spend some time thinking about which students are going to work well together. You have to consider learning styles, personality, and quite honestly, birth order. I think there's a lot to be said for learning about birth order because certain students are going to be more of a mentor and be willing to be more patient with the slower learner. And when you pick those students out, it really helps pairing and grouping students. It makes that a lot easier. And I think the squiggle, square, circle deal works really well. I don't know what age you could use that. Obviously not kindergarten, but I found that to be a really great way of grouping up adults. So depending on what age you work with. I just think ZPD is such a key ingredient in having a classroom where students feel successful and can grow. Alright, your students will come in a variety of sizes, shapes, and everything else. So here's a couple of bullet points that are the main differences. But it can I've never had the same student twice, that's for sure. Culture's a big one. And you may think, well, I'm in Idaho, but it's still a big one because you will have kids from out of state, and even though they may look the same as an Idahoan, a native Idahoan, they're not, and they have different values, and you have to be sensitive to the different values that come in. In fact, I had a student come in the other day, and he was talking to me. He had some advising questions, and as he's speaking, I'm trying to figure out where he is from because he's not Idahoan, he's not Californian, he is not Southern, and through the course of the conversation, he mentioned grew up in Wisconsin, and I was like, oh, okay, got it, Midwesterner, because it's different. The pace of the speaking pace and how you interact with people who are coming from different parts of the country is really important, because if you're a fast-talking Californian and you get with a slow-talking Midwesterner, and I'm being facetious here, but there's some truth in this. They don't like it, and you have to amp it down. And by the same respects, if you go to California and you don't drive fast and you don't talk fast and you don't do stuff quickly, the Californian's get irritated, right? So I don't know. I guess it sort of depends on where you are, but you have to be in tune with culture, even if it's not about color or something that's really obvious, clothing or something like that. There's still culture involved. Classism is important to understand and to be aware of because you're probably going to do it whether you realize it or not. And once you realize it, that's the first step, in my opinion. You become more understanding. You start looking for opportunities to learn more about other lifestyles and other ethnicities and cultures, and you start bringing all of those into your classroom and in turn into your life. And I think it makes you a more well-rounded person. It doesn't make you a perfect person because nobody is, but I just think that teaching brings you in contact with so many different kinds of people. You can't help but start thinking, wow, there's some really great stuff out there that I've never considered or thought of, or there are some situations there that I've never been empathetic to. So, field dependence and independence. Starts on page 246. And as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, gosh, here's another learning style, but we just learned 4 other learning styles. So I think sometimes we get a little overwhelming with the terminology for learning styles, but here are 2 more. I would like for you to read them, and we can talk more about them in class. To pause 1 second, I'd like to jump back to page 241 because I missed the part about there's bullet points here that it's titled, What are some generalized values of macroculture? And it talks about emphasis on active mastery and validation of work ethic and achieved status, strength, stress on assertiveness. If you go through those bullet points, those are going to feel probably pretty comfortable. You turn the page and come here into the bullet listings under generalized values of microculture, and maybe you're not really getting it or feeling like that's something that will apply to you. And it absolutely probably doesn't, but it will apply to your students. And so it's important to read this and be aware of it because it will help you understand the student that comes from a different background and a different culture as well. So that was all. I just found those bullets on page 241 and 242 to be very enlightening. We're going to Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. Starts on page 248. It's really interesting because we're covering this in 201, and so I'm starting to question why we're covering it in 2 different classes, except for that it's so important. The theory of these multiple intelligences is really a backbone for your lesson planning and how you interact with students. So I don't think it's a bad thing to look at it twice. I think if you take 201 and 204 at the same time, that might seem a little repetitive. It certainly does from a teaching point of view and teaching both classes. But anyway, there are 8. He is working on trying to define a 9th one. But I like the pictures that go with the words because intrapersonal and interpersonal are confusing. Intra, you think, is reflective within oneself, knowing oneself. That might help you. Interpersonal means talking between 2 people, and that's your circle people. Those are your people who learn better in groups and collaborative work. Logical, numbers, engineers. Word smart, linguistics, your writers, etc. Body smart is your athletes and music, musicians. Picture smart is typically your architects and your artists. And nature, those are the people out sampling things in the woods and writing very long papers that I don't understand. So there you go. I'm just kidding. The nature people. Yeah. Okay.